Welcome to the Badges and Banter podcast, your number one source for insights, discussions, and debates in the public safety industry, with your hosts, Jeff Halstead and Ken Kehmna.
Hey, welcome to today's podcast episode. This is actually going to be an interesting conversation because a lot of people are like, who are these guys? What do they do? So this is just myself and two chiefs talking to one another. So I'm going to let my co-host start and introduce not just him, but ask me a question. So we're going to get to know each other here.
I'm glad we're doing this. Thanks, Chief. I would imagine anybody looking for a podcast, interested in the topic, if they see the title of the podcast and they're interested, they want to listen in, they want to know, why am I listening to these two knuckleheads? What have they got to share? I mean, I have opinions myself. Just ask me. I'll give you all kinds of opinions, right?
Yeah. Who are these two has-beens? What are they doing now?
Exactly.
Besides milking a pension system.
Exactly. Couldn't just retire, could you? Couldn't retire and go away like we asked you to. No, you know what? I think, for me, I think one of the things that I have enjoyed the most about, my career and the people that I've had an opportunity to work with is getting to know them.
Yeah.
And this has been a tremendous amount of fun. I mean, certainly the work that we get to do, that you and I get to do together, is a tremendous amount of fun. But I've had just an absolute joy getting to know you as much as I have, and I think those that are listening to our podcast would love to know a little bit more about you and where you came from, what drives you, and I just think it would be good. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I am definitely not the atypical police. So, this side of the podcast, law enforcement, the other side will be, the fire profession. But on my side, this is going to shock. I have only said this publicly one time, and I'm happy to say it here. I actually started my career because I despised law enforcement so much, and let me explain what that means. In April of 1983, I was with my best friend in high school, and I had saved up my entire life for a sports car. I wanted a Corvette, and at 19-year-old, I paid cash for a used Corvette, red Corvette. When Prince's hit was Little Red Corvette, I had a red Corvette, and I lived in Fort Lauderdale. I was king of the world. I was cruising A1A Strip, 19 years old, T-tops off, in a red Corvette. And I had to work a lot of jobs to pay for said Corvette. So I was working a lot of hours. So me and my friend were driving home, a couple of coworkers, and I was racially profiled by a Fort Lauderdale police officer who thought with my fancy car, young looks, and long hair, I was a Cuban drug dealer, period. And he pulled me out of the T-tops by my neck, threw me on the back of my Corvette, broke my fiberglass spoiler, demanded ID, but his .357 Magnum was stuck under my chin, and I thought he was going to kill me. And I have done nothing other than I took home a coworker, and my friend, I'm yelling at my friend Wes, who's big. I'm like, Wes, get this guy off me. He goes, I can't. It's a cop. So I thought was a carjacking is now a traffic stop, and now I think I'm going to die. So he threw me to the ground, handcuffed me, and I have a cut on my eye from him. And then I went home, and I had fingernail marks on my neck. I was bleeding. It was the most traumatic experience ever, being racially profiled. And my dad saw it. We filed a complaint. And Fort Lauderdale PD blew off our complaint and just said it was 1:30 in the morning. Your son was in the wrong part of town. He's lucky to be alive, and they never investigated through internal affairs. So wow. I despised police officers. And then after I got married and we moved from Houston to Phoenix, I needed a job. And the only place hiring at the time was the police department. And I never in a million years thought I could even survive the police academy. And then lo and behold, 36 years later, I'm a retired chief of police talking about technology implementation all around the world. So yeah, my career path is definitely not your atypical police career path because I wanted nothing to do with this profession.
Oh, that is fascinating.
Yeah.
That is
so now I shared something. I think there's only about 8 people who know that story. So now a whole bunch of people know it. But no, it happened, and my best friend was there right when it happened. So there ain't no exaggeration.
Okay.
In fact, if anything, I perform on my call details of what happened. But Wes was right there, and he was like, I thought that cop's going to blow your head off. I'm like, yeah, I know. So did I.
Dang.
I know. Crazy. But it was a weird world back then. back then in the early 80s, tons of cocaine across South Florida, a lot of issues. You know, if you watch Scarface the movie, there's a reason that was a movie set in Miami and South Florida, is because it was all over the place.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that officer was justified. Thankfully, that officer is no longer in the profession. I did follow him because I thought someday I was going to meet this person face to face, and I didn't know how I would respond. But sadly, he died of cancer. He had colon cancer, and he died. He was a homicide investigator and then died from colon cancer. But never got to see him face to face to show him that I actually survived that incident. He got fired from my complaint, but they didn't investigate it, internal affairs. They just gave him an option to resign. He went to another department.
Yeah. Back in the days when they didn't have the kind of protections that they do today, so there was probably no due process.
He decided just, I'll resign and go to a new job, and that's what he did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got to ask, because you mentioned 19 years old, I'm just thinking, at 19, I'm a guy, so at 19 years old, probably not the best decision maker. I'm thinking, me in a Corvette at 19 years old, I don't give that car 3 weeks. I don't give it 2 weeks. I'm not even sure it makes the week without me doing something hard. How long did that car survive?
Well, it only survived 6 months because it was the stupidest thing I have ever done financially. My insurance, no one would carry me on an insurance carrier in South Florida, but I found some fly-by-night guy in Pompano Beach, Florida, and I had to pay cash up front for my 6-month policy. And my 6-month policy back then was $2,100 for 6 months. Today would be almost like $8,000, $9,000 for 6 months coverage.
Yeah.
So I drove it for 6 months and got the heck out of it because dumbest thing I ever did.
But it was in one piece.
But boy, it was in one piece. I was a safe driver. I didn't really hot rod. I did have a hot rod at one time. I had one of the fastest cars in South Florida. Another dumb decision. But I did whatever it took to impress the girls in bikinis on the beach. I was 19. So there you go.
By the time you get to our age, if you can't tell the story of your life through the bad decision making that led you to that point, you've been under a rock, man.
So now you know a little on my police entrance door. What's your fire profession entrance door? How'd you get started?
Oh God! I wish I had a great story like the red Corvette. To be honest with you, I've said it so many times. I truly think the profession chose me. I don't really ever recall a moment where I didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, from the time that I knew that I was going to have to work for a living, I knew what I wanted to do. I started pursuing the fire service as a career, as my lifelong goal.
At what age?
Well, I wasn't. Let's see. I was 16. I was 16 years old at the time. I became interested in it. Walked down to one of the local fire stations. Asked the engineer who was checking out the equipment, legendary engineer for the department I ended up getting hired for, by the way. He was legendary. Sent me to the front office to get some information about their Explorer program. It's through the Boy Scouts of America. It's a great program where
It's a great program.
Oh, phenomenal!
It's awesome. It's incredible leadership baseline of entry. It's great.
And I honestly, I didn't know anything about the Explorer program at the time. Honestly, I think we should probably talk to somebody about that program today because it really introduces young people to a wide range of careers that they might never have exposure to. And at 16 years old, I was showing up at a fire station. I was training with the firefighters. I was getting on the rig and going to calls. I mean, it was everything I wanted it to be and then some. And I was hooked. The very first moment I realized how there was no going back for me, I was on a call. We got a call for somebody. It was a medical distress call. This is back in the early 80s, and I was hooked. We walked into that house, and I think I'm fairly certain it was a full arrest, and we started working on the patient, and that was it. My path was absolutely set. So as soon as I had the opportunity to go from explorer to volunteer, the minute I turned 18, I applied for a volunteer program, became a volunteer, and immediately set the path to how do I get into the fire department? What is that path? At the time, paramedics were still an emerging position within the fire service, but it was becoming very clear that if I wanted to work for the fire department, going to paramedic school is going to improve my chances. So I did go to paramedic school. I put myself through the paramedic school. Do you remember the show Emergency?
Oh, without a doubt. Oh,
That is the paramedic school I went to.
Yeah.
Their picture actually hung on the wall. They went to Daniel Freeman Paramedic School back in the day, and me and a whole bunch of my friends went. Experience of a lifetime. Absolutely the experience of a lifetime. I lived in a fire station. LA County Fire Station, which other paramedic students from the fire department had. It was a program that was allowed to go on. The fire chief for LA County at the time was friends with the fire chief for the department that I volunteered for, and he worked it out so that there was a living unit behind one of the fire stations where the paramedic students could live. And so I went to school and lived above a fire station and studied, did all my studies up there, and it was...
What was the age in the fire department where you could be a full-time city employee as a firefighter? Was it 19 or was it 18?
I think it was 18 at the time. In fact, I'm certain it was 18 at the time. That was pretty much the standard at the time. I recall, I love this story. Very early in my endeavor to become a firefighter, taking tests to become a firefighter.
Yeah.
Somehow I happenstance did well enough on the interview to get to the chief's interview, which is right before getting hired.
Right.
I was maybe 3 months from turning 18. I was a mere baby, and here I am sitting in front of the fire chief and his staff in the Bay Area, and I'm sure he looked at me like, "How did you get in here? My goodness!" But I didn't get hired by that department. But I love to tell the story because I recall. The wonderful reception that I got and how warm and accepting everybody was of me. It was just a phenomenal start to my career. I ended up working for the department that was in the community that I lived, just a few miles from my house, and that's pretty much where I retired from. The same organization ended up sort of growing through consolidations and mergers and contracts. So I ended up working essentially in the same area for my entire career.
So at a time when most teenagers cannot even put together an outfit, you already have a career path set up.
Oh, yeah.
Because I could literally barely dress myself at 17, and you're interviewing for a career.
Well,
So night and day here, because you would not want me interviewing at 17. I'll tell you right now, that's not the kind of person I could be.
Well, to be fair, I grew up wearing a uniform from a very young age. So I went to private, Catholic school growing up. So I was wearing, the white shirt and the blue pants and everything.
Yeah.
Honest to goodness, when I retired, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with myself. If it wasn't uniforms hanging in my locker for me to wear that, I didn't know what I was going to wear that day.
Yeah. That's so funny. So I went in Phoenix, I was actually the smallest bouncer at probably the most popular nightclub in Phoenix, 909 East Campbellback, Zazu's. But anyway, so I worked there. I did not know that this was a central surveillance location for narcotics, cocaine, a lot of illicit activities. So when I applied for the police department and my current job position was bouncer at Zazu, everyone in the police department's like, he's a drug dealer. There's no way he's going to pass polygraph. But I went from bartending / bouncing to police academy, and I didn't understand the paramilitary organization. I was targeted like nobody's business. There are still, to this day, now I'm going back 1988, so 36 years later, there are still 3 policies in the training bureau manual that were from Jeff Halstead. So, yeah, I was not a good recruit. I tried really hard, but I wanted to be funny, and I did a good job imitating people, and I could imitate my captain really, really good. So I would be in the locker room horsing around, imitating my captain, both voice inflection and walking mannerisms. I had no idea that the supervisory command staff locker room is right around the corner, and they can hear everything we're doing. And they kept asking, who is this smart-ass recruit that's imitating our captain? It's Jeff Halstead. I got in so much trouble. I ran so much discipline runs that I had a stress fracture on my right foot and shin splints in both legs because they ran me to death trying to make me quit, but I just needed a job.
You were overtraining. You were being punished into overtraining.
I was such a bad recruit, but I got a written reprimand for my graduation speech. That's how bad it was. Internal Affairs interviewed me on my first day on the job.
How did they promote you to chief right after that? Because I think that's perfect. I think that is absolutely awesome.
No one in my academy class thought I would survive probation. So for those listening on police work, at least, you have an 11th month probationary period. And in 11 months, they can fire you at will. You have no protection. But then your 12th month, now you get union status, union protection. You become a union member. But for 11 months, I was targeted aggressively. Had the worst beat in the entire city of Phoenix, the most dangerous beat. I was in the Crips and Bloods and crack cocaine, and I got shot at constantly. 3 times in my rookie year, I got shot at. So it was just, I think they put me beast like, let's just get this kid killed since he won't quit because he's never going to make it. But yeah, I made it. So.
Well, you know, it's funny. I know we talked about this a little bit this morning before we went on, but I think that for me, one of the things I really look forward to in doing this with you is getting to know you as an individual, but also getting to know the discipline a little bit, because I do think that it's very misunderstood. I mean, you and I have worked across the aisle our entire careers. We've either worked for the same city, I mean, not literally, but figuratively.
Yep.
Worked for the same city, same county, same whatever. We wear a very similar uniform. We show up on the same call. People kind of lump us into this, fire and police, fire and police, fire and police. The roles and responsibilities that I have and what I have done with my career versus what you have done with your career, very, very different. And how you got there and how you learned and how you trained and how you grew into becoming a police chief, a leader, and even a leader in retirement, I think is fascinating. Some very good friends of mine that I worked my entire career with ended up becoming police chiefs or whatever they did in the police department, and I've always marveled at what they've done and what they've learned from life, what they know about the world that we live in, their perspective on the world that we live in, and I find it fascinating, and I think that I have a lot to learn about that, and I think our listeners, especially my fire service listeners, I think they have a lot to learn about that, because we have so much responsibility to work with one another, and yet sometimes we know very little about one another.
I would agree with you about one thing. I wanted to be in the fire department first because they were in my vision as a young kid in South Florida. The fire profession was so organized, and all of the stations were just clean, immaculate. It's just their equipment was amazing. So I wanted to go to the fire department, but they would get 1,000 people for 5 positions. And then I looked at the police testing, and they'd get like 200 people for 35 positions. And I'm like, well, I know my odds. I'll probably get a better job. At least I can get a job because I needed a job. But the competition back then in mid to late 80s, oh my God, it was so difficult. And everyone told me, if you don't have a relative or an in, like the Explorer program for you, you're not going to be a firefighter. It's just not going to happen. You've got to, where I was living at the time, both Houston and in Phoenix, you have to have this staged entry, like got to volunteer a lot, and you got to do the Explorer program, and you got to have a lot of knowledge, because in that interview process, if you don't have that experience, they're going to pass on you very quickly.
Yeah.
And then that was not the case with law enforcement. So that's how I navigated that process. Barely got hired. I was the next to last person hired in my class. And I think it was because they were like, this kid's definitely a risk for us to hire. But I could tell my wife, I don't know who's going to hire me, which city. I applied to 4 at that time and around Phoenix. So I was Glendale PD, Mesa PD, Tempe PD, and Phoenix PD. All 4 applications on the same time. And I said, whoever hires me first, I'm never leaving. I'm going to stay there until I can retire, because I am not going through this again. And God's path was a good path for me, and I went exactly where I needed to be and where I needed to grow. So it was awesome. But you're right. I would not have learned anything in the fire profession if it wasn't for Phoenix's mindset as a kind of a national leader of incident command and unified command.
Yeah.
Then I started living, working, training with different battalion companies constantly. I started learning their language, their deployment, expectation, protocol, and then all of our resources started training together. That was probably some of the happiest and most fulfilling days of my 20 plus years in Phoenix PD, was I learned an entirely separate profession, which was much, much more solid as a brother and sisterhood than police work. Police work, you're in precincts, so your precinct's solid, but then you have 9 precincts over the city. Those fire station and the battalion company networks, they're solid.
Yeah.
Yeah, and y'all eat way better than we do. Let's just saying that.
Well, I can definitely tell you. I can tell you which stations and which crews I put the most weight on working with. That is for sure. Yeah, there may be physical fitness equipment in every one of these fire stations, but there's also a really nice kitchen in every single one. And believe me, some people can cook.
Yeah, and one thing I was envious of in my career was funding for the fire mission. Historically, if you go back multiple generations of fire leaders, they knew how to leverage political strength and influence to make their mission financially supported. We didn't in law enforcement. And to this day, we're still trying to catch up.
That is fascinating because I would have the exact opposite perspective
Yeah.
about law enforcement's ability to secure funding at a state or federal level as second to none by comparison to the fire service. It's just interesting. We actually had this conversation when I was on the board of directors for FireScope. And we were discussing this because Arnold Schwarzenegger commissioned the Blue Ribbon 2020 when he was a governor in California. And there was a lot of changes in Blue Ribbon 2020 that were there were significant costs to
Was this a
implement
law, or was this kind of going to be policy for the state?
It was a commission that we want to, add these personnel, this equipment. These are the things we want to do to address the fire issues in California, specifically wildfires.
Okay.
And I can remember we were discussing this at the board meeting, and it was, we need to pair up with law enforcement. They are so much better in Sacramento. They understand the process better. They understand how to work the halls better than we do, and we're just not doing a very effective job of that. Every time the Office of Emergency Services, Cal OES would put in a request for rigs. It would not make its way all the way through the process for any number of reasons, and so it was identified that we need to be better. And law enforcement was the example that we use. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, it definitely flip-flopped for me, both state of Arizona as well as the state of Texas. Fire is a pinnacle of excellence within that public safety entity. And if fire spoke up that they needed A, B, or C, it's a no-brainer. It's a unilateral vote, 9-0 on my city council in Fort Worth. But if police propose it, I may squeak out with a 5-4, 6-3 vote. Because, one, our budget was already so ridiculously big, I could not go into contingency funds to get some of the aggressive finances I needed to equip what we needed for the growing mission. And I always envied that, within the fire profession in general, you're fighting a fire and responding to a fire incident, and then so that's not a human in nature.
Yeah.
And you suppress that fire and you control it and you limit the loss of life and loss of building and stuff. And then in fire, we are human driven. The active shooter, the sexual assault suspect, the homicide, and we are fighting the people and not a thing. And I envied the fact that y'all could fight a thing and always win. And God forbid you had a line of duty death, because we had some in Phoenix PD, and I did honor guard with their fire honor guard, and it was so sad. But in ours, the volatility of dealing with people was always profiled in the media. But dealing with fire was always heroic and great job. And we always banter back and forth, respectfully, of course, but, we are back and forth with one another. God, if I could take the test again, I would go to the red side versus the blue side, because I wouldn't be beat up in the media. But no, those are all great points.
Well,
but you're right about, we did not have that same that you saw in Sacramento. We did not have that.
And much respect, because the example that you just gave, I have used that exact example in reverse, though, about the dangers of your profession, at least the dangers that I have traditionally faced in my profession, have not had the willful intent to want to do me harm. A structure fire does not know who I am, does not want to. It is only through my own action that I put myself in danger. It is unlike somebody who wants to do me harm or potentially take my life, and that is what you deal with and what you have dealt with throughout your career. And I always find that admirable that you're capable of putting yourself in that position, because one, to be willing to do it is one thing, but there's a capacity to be able to set that aside and continue to move forward and do what you have to do.
Yeah, turning that off, call to call to call to call, and the volatility and the danger and the threat. I mean, you go from, a 3 o'clock in the afternoon phone call of a kid got his bike stolen at school, and your very next call is domestic violence where the husband has a knife and he's going to kill the first responder. So, and then your next call is a burglary report that's been held 4 hours. So you go this call to call to call to call, and then you got to adjust your mindset in dealing with the threat potential or the elevated threat potential on all of these calls. But I remember distinctively during the LA riots when first time I remember in Phoenix that there were some knuckleheads shooting at fire trucks.
Yeah.
And so we organized a way to have a cover car with every one of not just the ambulances, but also the ladder trucks, just so the neighborhood knew that we were going to protect you. So we had long guns in, both of those cars, but we had cover cars that went before and after the fire truck just to protect them, because it was at a time, it was a crazy time back then when the LA riots were gone, because it did bleed over to our city. And we're like, it didn't even happen here.
Right.
Yet people are taking shots at fire trucks. I'm like, y'all are out of your mind. These are the absolute human beings that need to get there to save your aunt and uncle's life, or grandma and grandpa. But why are you shooting at them?
Yeah.
It was just a weird time in my career. We talked about that just a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
About having threats towards firefighters. But it's been a long time. But I do like the fact that our professions have that mutual admiration and respect. We know our roles and we know how to fulfill those roles, yet still stay in support with one another. Because in some major cities, to remain unnamed, there are some relationships that are fractured and they do not get along, and that would not be a fun place to work.
No, that's a great segue to something I really wanted to talk about, which is the true opportunity and the blessing that this has been. I mean, I feel as though I feel like this profession chose me to have lived a life doing something that I truly believed I was meant to do and that I really wanted to do has been an absolute gift.
Yeah.
To do it in a place where, like you're describing, where you don't have a good relationship with your partner agencies, would be very hard. I've never experienced that before. I've just been really lucky in my career not to have experienced.
Yeah, same here. I don't think I would want to experience it either. All right, so we almost out of time, but we always end our podcast with a little personal insight. So I'm going to let you ask me any personal question you want. You can put me on the spot, and then I'll ask you one of our pre-assigned little card shuffling questions.
All right, so I'm going to preface this with something that I think is incredibly important. Someone who is incredibly important in my life, and that is my bride.
Yeah.
We go way back. It is a fire department connection story that we'll probably get into here at some point. But my personal question to you is, how did you meet your bride?
July 3rd, 1986, 7 o'clock in the evening, I was asked to go on a blind date. My brother's an attorney in Houston, and his receptionist wanted to set me up with her roommate, and I did not want a relationship. I did not want a relationship. I was busy, single, having fun. Nope, I'm good. I don't need anything. She goes, let's just meet for pizza. So July 3rd, we met for pizza at Star Pizza in Houston. In 20 minutes, I knew I was going to marry her.
That's
in
awesome.
20 minutes. She thought I was a little nutsy. She was like, I think it took her 2 months. But we've been together 38 years. I knew in 20 minutes that this is the woman I will marry and spend the rest of my life with.
That is awesome.
Oh, I treasure it. I'm telling you. I married way up, so I won the lottery that day. So I'm good. I'm good if I never win the lottery again. All right, so
awesome.
Mine to you is, what is one of the top 3 things on a so-called bucket list you're going to get done?
That I want to get done. Bucket list may be putting this a little bit too high, because I know a lot of people have done this, but one of the things that we were just having a discussion about, I've never been to Europe, and I want to go to. Never been to Europe. I know. Things have always kind of gotten in the way and just prevented us from going. And I I want to go and spend a considerable amount of time in Europe and traveling Europe and experiencing the history of Europe, the art of Europe, the architecture of Europe, and sort of the origins of civil society that I really just want to see it and experience it in an immersive way. I have my wife likes to joke about this. When we go to museums of any kind, it does
Right,
not matter what
right.
kind of museum, I will take all the time that is possibly available to read every single
Good for
plaque
you.
and everything
Yeah, good for you.
because I'm just fascinated
You got
by
to
that
immerse.
stuff.
Yeah, you got to
Yeah.
take that all in.
So to go to the museums and see the world's most famous art and the places where the way that inspired the art, that
Yeah.
inspired the creativity of man, that's my bucket list.
Yeah, cool. That's a great list. I still can't believe you haven't been to Europe. That's maybe one thing I've done you haven't. I got to put that on my chalkboard. So for everybody that doesn't know, just two old chiefs here. We're talking, but we actually met a year ago here at Genesis. We're both labeled subject matter experts. And the chief here is the fire expert and emergency response as well as emergency management. And then I am on the police side. So if you go to genesis.com, that's GENASYS.com, and you look at all the blog article and things, myself or the chief here, we have had input into every single one of those. But I tell you what, if you just go to the website and you drill down into the aspects of what this company can provide globally in the crisis management, crisis communications, and response, activation, evacuation, it is a stellar organization. We met here a year ago. We talked about doing one of these conversations, and we just wanted to give you all a few minutes so you could actually, who are these two guys? What are their backgrounds? So Ken's with fire, Jeff's with police, but we're just a couple old guys that want to have a good conversation. Thanks for joining me, Ken.
Absolutely. Thanks, brother. Good talking to you.
Good talking to you.